Okie dokie. Hello, and welcome to Late to the Party, episode 12. This is the Geeks Unleashed monthly book club, where, in addition to our weekly podcast, we talk our way through what are considered some of the most essential graphic novels of all time. This month's graphic novel, we're taking a look at Fables, volumes 1 and 2, which Fables is huge. So this is basically, we're covering like the first 10 issues here. So it's a nice little nugget introduction into the world of Fables.
As usual, I'm Mark, and I'm joined by my co-host Jasmine.
Hello.
And we also are very privileged to be joined by Jennifer from Comics Will Break Your Heart from YouTube. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk Fables because it's something that I read when I was getting into comics back in high school, and I don't think that I've read it since. So it was really nice reading it again.
Oh no, I loved rereading it. I was going to say, before we jump into Fables, though, do you want to just tell those people listening about your own YouTube channel?
Yeah. So the YouTube channel that I have, Comics Will Break Your Heart, I do a weekly show with my friend Mars, typically on Sunday mornings, and we talk about all the books that we read, maybe the current books that are coming out week to week, as well as some of the other books that we're reading. Right now, I have just bullied her into picking up House of X, Powers of X, and so hopefully we'll be reading and talking about that soon. This next upcoming week is actually our 1-year anniversary of doing the show. So really excited to be doing that. She's definitely the better half of the show. She's the best co-host.
Well, congrats on making it a year.
Yeah, thank you.
Did you launch that out of the sort of back of COVID? Was it kind of COVID related that you started doing it?
Yeah, I actually started the YouTube channel as a whole in May of 2020, but then her and I started doing a show in November of 2020. I had done a couple of other videos and things like that, but then it really became a weekly show when her and I were talking. I had done a couple of other weekly and monthly shows with other people, but then this was her and I's on my channel. So that's what we've been doing for the last year.
Oh, amazing. It's good to see the good positive things coming out of COVID, and just like you said, you started a little bit before, but obviously the partnership between the two of you. So congrats on the 1 year.
Thank you.
It's amazing too. So let's move on to Fables, Jasmine.
All right, jumping right in. So volume 1 is called Legends in Exile, and volume 2 is called Animal Farm. The writer of Fables is Bill Willingham. Pencils are by Lan Medina. Colors by Steve Lealoha. It is published by DC, Vertigo, no longer. So DC basically has taken back the reins, but it was originally published in single issue format starting in July of 2002. 150 issues later, it kind of ended in 2015, but supposedly we're going to have a return to Fables in 2022, May of 2022. They're kicking off again with issue 151. So it's one of those comics that has been hugely successful. It's won several Eisners, Hugo nominations. Basically, it is like every fairy tale you've ever heard of, but what if these fairy tales had escaped into our world and are now living among us, is basically the premise of Fables. So the main comic had several spin-offs. We had Jack of Fables. We even had a Batman versus Bigby. Bigby is the big bad wolf, from regular fairy tale readers. There was even the Telltale game, The Wolf Among Us, which is a really, really great game. So sad that Telltale Games is no more, because I would really like a sequel to that game. But basically, it is anyone who has ever watched Once Upon a Time on ABC at some point. It's very similar to that concept where fairy tales are in the real world, but they still have some of their fairy tale abilities. So it's really interesting. And a lot of reading through these first 2 volumes definitely felt like a nice introduction to, I don't know, characters you're super familiar with, living in the real world. I kind of love the hierarchy, really, the way that everything breaks out, the way that they kind of form their own government. They've got their own council, but they still got magic, in, some of the houses and apartments that they live in, because they're based in Manhattan. It's almost like the Harry Potter magic, where it's tiny little apartment, but when you walk in, it's like this huge, expansive castle type space. So it's just a really like fantastical but modern kind of read. So that's kind of what I get from Fables.
So we're covering the first 10 issues, volumes 1 and 2. And as Jasmine said, this is really just, I don't know, it's like first chapter or first or second chapter of this humongous story of Fables, 150 issues, variety of spin-offs. Me and myself, I've actually only read the first 80 issues, and it's something.
But listen, how you said that, the first 80. I've only read the first 80.
Yeah, I know. I always feel bad about it because they sit in this long box, like calling at me. And although there's many issues that call at me to still be read, but it's only because I've had them for so long, and I feel bad that I didn't finish. Anyway, but it was brilliant to go back. But anyway, sort of to summarize the sort of plot of 1 and 2 before we sort of go in and jump into it. Volume 1 is issues 1 to 5, covers the possible murder of Rose Red, who is the sister of Snow White. This story, but it uses that story to introduce us to the fairy tale characters who have escaped from, in speech marks, the homelands to live in the mundane world, or as we get to hear them be called constantly, like the Mundies, and obviously they're living in New York and they form their own community of Fabletown. In the second volume, we move to what they call is the farm, which is upstate, and we follow Snow White and Rose Red to the farm and get to see the more animal type fables, which you're familiar with, including characters which I love seeing, the Jungle Book and stuff like that. Yeah. And the story has just like George Orwell written all over it, which I'd forgotten about it until I got into it. Anyway, done enough talking. I'd like to hear from Jennifer though, like in terms of the first 2 volumes. Did you enjoy reading the first 10 issues, and sort of what's your sort of reading experience?
Yeah, like I had said, the Fables I had read when I was in high school, and I think it was only maybe like the first 4 or 5 volumes, so trailing you a little bit on those 80 issues. So what would that maybe be, like the first like maybe 30 or so issues? Mm-hmm. And it's been a minute since I've been back to it, and it was everything that you guys had said, where it's these classic characters that you have seen before, but then with a more modernized twist. And not only are these characters, they have all of the baggage that comes with this story and like this mythos behind them, but just from their drama, from their day-to-day life. And there's so much about these characters that, like, you know, we step in and we think we know who the big bad wolf, or we think that we know who like Snow White is going to be. But then just going back and seeing how familiar these characters feel, and really, really appreciated getting another read on this.
Brilliant. What about you, Jasmine?
I think I read the first volume maybe 5 or 6 years ago. But so it was fun to take another look at it. And honestly, I got to the point where I was like looking up characters because I didn't recognize everyone. And I remember the first time I read this, I had no idea who Rose Red was. And I even looked it up, and like, she's an actual character that the Brothers Grimm created to be Snow White's sister. And I was like, okay, but if you have never read Brothers Grimm, like never in all of the fairy tales or any of the other movies or books that I've read about these characters, like Rose Red never came up. So that was kind of a fun take on it, just because like you're not familiar with that character in general, like even if you're familiar with the other stuff. So the whole time through reading through the first volume, it was kind of like, is she dead? Is she did she just run away? Like, what's going on? But kind of like Jennifer said, I love the drama. Especially in the first volume, like the crap that they get up to, the fact that Prince Charming is a total douchebag, like it's just so much fun to read and see like the different kinds of personalities that these characters might actually have. It's almost like the ultimate in fan fiction, right? Like you have the characters as they were originally intended, and then you have this totally new take on them. Like, yeah, well, what if Snow White took place in, New York City in the early 2000s? But there were so many things that I really enjoyed, and just like random little tidbits that cracked me up. Like you would see Colin, who is the pig, who keeps escaping from the farm, but like he'll just randomly be in panels sleeping. Like you catch him sleeping in a park, he's sleeping in like someone's front yard. It's hilarious because it's like, does no one else notice this giant freaking pig walking around New York City? And then there was a line in the first volume with Pinocchio where Pinocchio has been turned into a real boy, but he's still in a child's body. He's like 300 or 400 years old. And he's like, I want to find that fairy godmother, and that bitch, she messed up everything, and I've never even hit puberty yet, and I really just want to get laid. And it was so funny. So I just got such a kick out of reading the first volume. The second volume was a little bit heavier, and honestly, the second volume kind of reminded me of Why the Last Man, with like the way you've got this faction within a separated faction, and Goldilocks is basically like this crazy revolutionary type character. But it was so fun. It was so fun to read about these characters doing sort of what I would call like modern things.
Yeah, I think I didn't read it when it first came out. I'd probably say like a year or so afterwards, because I think I went back and got the first 12 or 15 issues, and I carried on going. And like Jennifer, I had to get these first 10 out, and it was nice to sit down and reread them because it's been so long since I've read them. Having read these first 10 though, I'm like, I read them like today just because I wanted to keep it fresh in my mind. But now I'm like, I want to carry on going. So I don't know if I could ever achieve getting to 150. So like I can imagine burning out, but I thought maybe it's something I do like on a Sunday, pick up 5 issues and read them. But one of the things that really struck me though when I was reading them, so obviously I reread this, and I've obviously got some slight knowledge of things that are coming up, and I have to say I love, like, what we talked about, obviously the modernization of these characters, and we talk about that in more detail in a bit, but one of the things I actually loved about what because you said a minute ago, Jasmine, about you didn't know about Rose Red.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that really struck me when I was reading these 10 issues was actually Bill Willingham's attention to detail and his planning. And I loved all of that because I could see tiny little things that at the moment not important that he's put in there, and they might come in like issue 70 and stuff like that. So I was like, when I was reading this, I was like, oh, I'd love to sit down with him and just know how far he planned. Like that's kind of just as someone who's read a bit further, that's kind of hit me. But in terms of overall, I love these stories. And what I used to do was whenever I used to meet someone who was interested in comics and would tend to gravitate towards, the Spider-Mans and Batmans and stuff like that, I would always try and also pushing down like the indie road. And I've said this before with Why the Last Man and Fables were the two I'd always recommend because they were just so easy, I felt, to get into for like a non-comic book reader if they didn't have the knowledge. And I know Fables does grow into quite a massive world, but I think definitely the first few volumes are very easy to get into, and I think most people won't probably go all the way to the end if you're a casual reader. But I think the first 2 volumes are quite separate and you don't have to worry too much about later on. So I would still quite happily recommend these two books to maybe casual readers. So
to your point, it's funny that you mentioned like suggesting something like this instead of maybe like Superman or Spider-Man or like one of those like mainstream superheroes. I feel like I do the same thing with indies because you don't have to read 40, 50 years of like history of these other characters to get into. And I think that's why Fables does this so well, is because it's characters that you already know, with the exception of like Rose Red, or I don't remember like Little Boy Blue. Like I know that Little Boy Blue something shoe, like I know that there's like a nursery rhyme, but I don't really remember. But it's characters that people should already be familiar with, but don't necessarily need to read several centuries of Brothers Grimm to get into, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the cost of entry is really low for something like this, so it makes it that much more intriguing. Because like, and especially with, even if you're not familiar with like Brothers Grimm stuff, like Jungle Book characters, let me tell you how terrified of Shere Khan I was when I was a kid. Like, so to see those characters even come into play, you got Goldilocks and 3 Bears. Everybody knows Goldilocks. You've got Brer Rabbit. I mean, there's so many different like areas of characters that come into play here that it's almost like a gigantic Easter egg hunt because there's literally something for everyone in these stories.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think probably good segue there, Jasmine, into actually talking about the characters. I think this book, why I think it easily works well for people as a gateway into comics, is that you're familiar with so many of these characters. Like, without people probably wouldn't necessarily assume that there's, if you don't know that much about comics, you wouldn't necessarily assume there's a book out there about fables that have been modernized.
Mm-hmm.
But if you obviously became aware of it through recommendations or whatever, however you found this book, it's a very easy thing to get into because everybody knows the Big Bad Wolf and Snow White and Cinderella and Prince Charming, and Goldilocks. These are characters that we've heard about, from 5 or 6 years old. We grew up hearing about fairy tales, and we may have seen, Disney adaptations and the latest Jungle Book adaptation, whatever it is. We've all seen these many things, and I think it's very clever, like how Bill has managed to sew them all together into this world and sit there and take unique tweaks to these characters. And I one of my favorite tweaks was the Prince Charming tweak, to be honest with you. It's a very clever, but obviously not very modern take on, especially I guess in this current climate. 2002 maybe could get away with that a little bit more. But anyway, so I just sort of wondered, going around the room, just what our takes on how he's modernized these characters. Actually, Jennifer, what's your thought on the modernization of these characters?
Yeah, I think the character that I appreciated the modernization of the most in these first 2 volumes, I mean, there were a lot of them, but I really appreciated Snow White and how I felt like they gave Snow White so much more literal agency. Like, she is a boss, like she's kind of running the show. And I really appreciated that they did that. And they even like make mention in the first issue. There is a couple that's coming up, and they want to get divorced, and then something happens in the issue of the Seven Dwarfs show come up, and Boy Blue pulls them aside and is like, never ever mention the Seven Dwarfs ever.
Yeah.
So I thought like things like that were really interesting, and like I said, they really make her, I think, the pivotal character of this book, and give her, like, she got divorced from Prince Charming because her sisters, I mean, I don't know how much I'm spoiling, so I'm sorry, but her sister, slept with her husband, and so they got divorced a while back. And so there's just all of these little nods to it. And I know Easter eggs was mentioned earlier. One of my favorite Easter eggs was that in volume 2, so in Animal Farm, you see the old mother who lived in a shoe.
Yes.
And on the wall, there's like a little like embroidery thing that says "shoe sweet shoe" instead of "home sweet home." And just little things like that I thought were absolutely incredible, and gave it like not just the characters, modernization of the characters, but modern humor. And just it really had a lot of fun. And even though especially Animal Farm dealt with a lot of different kind of heavy subjects, maybe like colonization or the way that people are marginalized, I think that it I don't know whether that was Willingham's intention or not, but it does talk about a lot of those subjects, but does it in a way that can be humorous and where we can really relate to the character.
Yeah, I read that as well, about especially like in volume 2, about like revolutionaries and stuff like that, and Rose Red being red, and like, that kind of thing. And the fact that she instantly has the red sort of bandana around her head and instantly took to leading a revolution and stuff like that. So I think there's definitely stuff in there which I think he's probably played on sort of American history there, I think, putting that into volume 2. In terms of my thoughts on modernizations of characters, I love the take on, I did say earlier, the Prince Charming take. Big Wolf, though, I thought was great. I love to be honest, the Big Bad Wolf, I think that's probably got to be, for me, one of the most famous fable type characters. Like, the Big Bad Wolf is always, for me, I think, a go-to character in sort of folklore. And the fact that they've turned it on his head and turned big bad wolf into like the good guy, and made him a detective as well, like a detective of Fabletown. I just thought that was just a great spin on things, and so that was one of my sort of favorite modernizations of the character. But I just loved all the tweaks and sort of even like the animal takes as well, like, you know, how the fact that they were thinking ahead with creating weaponry for basically human fables, like, so to create like guns on their heads and stuff like that. I thought that was a pretty cool take as well. So what about you, Jasmine? What are your thoughts on sort of the modernizations?
I did love how it kind of subverted a lot of things, like how we've got Bluebeard, and he's just sort of like this guy that they expect to do bad things, but he's kind of just like this douchey rich guy.
Yeah.
I kind of, again, like you said, what they did with Charming, how he's really a schmuck. I thought that was hilarious. Um, and other characters, like the way that they kind of have Belle and the Beast, like the way that they're sort of this married couple that argues all the time. Just in general, the way that everybody kind of interacts together, how the hierarchy that they've created in the books is nothing like the hierarchy that you would remember from any of the stories themselves. So that's sort of how it takes on its own unique feel. But yeah, I'd have to say Big B. I love the take on him. Like, and I love that even in the first volume, at one point he gets really, really flustered and he does turn into a wolf. So it's all, and like by the time you get to the second volume, they're like, well, yeah, we know you got your sheriff down there in Fabletown, but you know, he is not allowed up at the farm. Like, he's not forgiven for what he did to the three little pigs up here, so he can't come up here. Um, so I just I love how they throw those things in there, like the things that you would recognize from the stories. The kind of modern twist in the way that they did the beast transformation with Beauty and the Beast, and how he only transforms to a beast when Belle is upset with him. And so, like, if she's in a good mood and she's happy with him, then he could be like the prince version, and if she's upset with him, then he's the beast version. There's so many little things that just make this so enjoyable, and it doesn't feel like you're reading retellings of those old stories that we're all familiar with. It all feels brand new.
Yeah, I was gonna say, of all the characters we've read, is any of them sort of like a favorite, or like a one you feel has got like sort of great potential? Jennifer, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I definitely think that Snow White was probably the most surprising for me. I do think that I liked the way that they turned Prince Charming, Jasmine, to use your words, into a schmuck. Like, he's just this. He's definitely he takes advantage of everyone around him. Like, it's not even just that, like, he's charming and that, like, he does nice things, or that he acts a certain way to get what he wants. Like, he takes advantage of everyone that's around him. Like, he meets someone and he says, like the waitress, and he's like,
Oh
I
my
want to
God,
take
that whole thing.
yeah, and he's like, oh, well, I did want to take you back to like my place, or go back to your place, whatever it may be, but I forgot my wallet. So I was just gonna dine and dash, and so he just like schmoozes his way out of a situation and takes advantage of them, and especially seeing his history with the other characters in Fabletown, that he has just burned every last bridge that he had there, and so he has to go to the Mundys. So I appreciate that that twist where it's like, you think Prince Charming is supposed to be this great guy, like, and I think a lot of Game of Thrones. I was thinking about that a lot while reading this, and thinking about Jaime Lannister and how. Even though Jaime Lannister, is supposed to be part of the Knights Guard, and just be the protector of the realm and protector of the king and do all these great things, but he's just kind of a piece of shit. Granted, he does have his like redeeming character arc, but in this book, Prince Charming, definitely not a good guy. So I thought that was surprising. But the character that I really, really like, I don't want to say like necessarily identified with, but I really appreciated, like I said, Snow White. They gave the character so much more agency than, say, just I don't know, eating an apple and you know, the Seven Dwarves, I think that they really made her into a really strong character, which I appreciated a lot.
Yeah, brilliant. I do. I have to say the whole Prince Charming thing. I do agree with all of you. I think it was a really great take. I love the fact that they put all the Prince Charmings into one. Like from every Fable story, he was the guy. He was the he was essentially married to all these different princesses. Like, and I thought that was such a great idea to do that. So, and like you said about the smooching in the restaurant when he was like, I was gonna, run out the door without paying. I love that later on he's still taking advantage, like writes her a note, like I helped myself to some money because I knew you wouldn't mind. And whilst I'm out, can you wash my clothes and blah blah blah. And I was like, how does it like? I'm sure there are people out there like this in the real world. And I was just like, how do you just go about your world or your life just treat people like crap? Maybe it's just he's been so used to getting what he wants, it doesn't occur to him that how he is. So, what about you, Jasmine?
I think Bigby is my favorite character. Just because it's a big transition for me. There was one particular version of the Three Little Pigs that I had when I was a kid where the wolf was so terrifying that anytime my mom tried to read the book to me, I would like freak out and start crying. So the big bad wolf has always been like this, like, like when you're a kid, you have these things that are just so terrifying and then you kind of revisit them later and you're like, oh, that really wasn't that bad. But so big bad wolf has always been like this really kind of terrifying, scary character in my head. So getting to read Bigby as like this downtrodden detective that's like, I got another eternity ahead of me, like I don't really care, I'm gonna chain smoke, I'm gonna be mean to people, but I'm still gonna get the job done. Plus like the detective shtick, I guess you could say, is kind of one of my favorite like tropes or genres. I just love detective stories. So Bigby and watching him kind of let everything play out in the first volume especially, I just really enjoyed his character.
With Bigby, I initially was a bit like, is this like Columbo? Like, is he just a bumbling idiot? Like, because initially I was going down that road with, is he a bumbling idiot? Because Snow White makes a reference about how he was taking the same approach to literally everybody, like pretty much accusing them of being the murderer. And I was like, is this just deliberate, like bumbling fool, or am I just missing something? Like,
he reminds me of well, I guess it's the other way around, but Benoit Blanc from Knives Out. Like the whole first what? Oh, you got to watch Knives Out. The whole first volume kind of reminded me a lot of the way that the story develops and plays out in Knives Out.
It's on my list. So many things to watch and read and listen to. Since I work from home, I rarely get to listen to anything now. It's just read and watch now. I used to use driving time to listen to stuff too, but those audiobooks and podcasts that I don't get to listen to so much. My sister was like, "Oh, have you listened to this murder podcast yet?" And I was like, no, because I like go from there to here, like in my house. I mean,
up the stairs, down the stairs. That's about it.
Basically, yeah. So I was like, and the drives I do are very 10-minute long now, rather than the sometimes hour a day I used to do. So anyway, but Bigby Wolf though, I actually have to say I really loved when he not just revealed like the murder type thing, how he went through the murder scene and he was breaking down every little bit. And it was the thing about the CDs, like I thought was pretty good, like how she left all the ones she cared about at the front. And I was like, I didn't notice that, because I did pick up on the lock on the fridge, and but there was a lot of things that he threw around, and like even things like Jack wasn't covered in blood and stuff like that, and was clearly out of breath, and he was like, oh, Jack was massively overplaying it. So I thought, okay, he wasn't the bumbling idiot that he was kind of trying to portray he was, but also I love the fact that he was like, look, every detective pretty much has a boring job, so when every opportunity comes to have that whole big scene. Like he's like, of course I'm going to take it.
Yeah.
Right? So I thought that was good too. I was like, yeah, why not? I suppose, you know what, if you don't get a murderer like every 10 or 15 years or however long it is, because in their community, all he does is police their community. But I think, why not have a big grand finale?
Yeah, his big parlor scene, as you kept calling it.
Big parlor scene. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. For me, I do have to say I really do love Big B, but the character I thought came into her own was actually Rose Red in the second volume, and I like the fact that she is going to become essentially take over from Wayland at the farm. So for a character that, like you, I don't know about you, Jennifer, but for me, I didn't really know much about Rose Red, so I love to see her growth, like from obviously being a bit of a sneaky, and associating with Jack at the beginning, and then trying to see in the second volume her starting to look after her sister, which obviously she hasn't really done over the years, and deliberately going behind enemy lines, joining the revolution with the plan of trying to save her sister, and at the end turn around and say, well, look, I actually now want to run the farm so me and you sisters can be on a level playing field. So I thought that was actually nice to see her growth over those 10 issues, and I actually think her character's got a lot of potential going forward, so that was something I really liked reading. So
yeah, I agree with that with Rose Red, especially when I think that in volume 1 there's the moment where Big B like reveals everything, right? And it's like, this is how I knew at each moment, like these were all the clues, and kind of pieced it together. There's almost that moment for Red where she's like, well, I knew that when we got to the farm, I knew that they were going to kill us, so here's what I did. And like I snuck around, and like even though it looks like I was against you for a moment, the entire time when talking to her sister, like I was actually for you. Like everything that I did was for you and for us. And like you said, now I want to be your equivalent, or, take over this responsibility here. And I felt like it was very much a moment of Rose Red was saying, like, to Snow White, you inspired me. Like, I'm doing this because I see how well you're doing. Like, that's what it felt like to me.
Yeah, I really did like seeing that relationship. Sort of, they kind of were addressing the problems of their relationship in I think it was issue 6, and even just the point of like where they were flashing back to them as children, and they're having to share a bed as adults, like not just adults, like over 300 years. Well, they must be more than 300 years old, but like over 300 years. I think they've been living in the mundane world or something 300 years, so I can't imagine how old they are supposed to be. So I thought that was quite like nice to see that development over those 10 issues. So I just thought it was pretty cool with Rose Red. So that was my sort of thoughts on it. But let's get into the sort of structure and writing of these books. But my first question to both of you is, because I obviously read this when it came out, and I think I read it, like I say, about a year after it came out in 2003. And I think it's pretty cool that this came out in 2002, and next year, 20 years later, Bill's bringing back issue 151. I won't be able to read that easily, but I just wondered if you guys thought this holds up over 20 years. Like, do you think it's actually still a good, I think what I mean by that is sometimes things that are written a long time ago, as we know, like Dr. Seuss, isn't always as easily
appropriate.
I was trying to find a word. Yeah, as easily as appropriate. There's nothing like that, I think, in this writing. But I just wondered what you guys thought about. Does it hold up over 20 years? Jennifer, what do you think?
Yeah, certainly, especially having read it about just over 15 years ago. I definitely think that reading it then and then reading it now, I still got a lot of enjoyment out of it. As someone who, like me personally, I feel like I'm very critical of those things, that even if it was a joke that was told 10 years ago, I'm definitely going to be one of those people that's like, let's leave that joke 10 years ago and not now. I'm definitely going to be the first person to do that. So going back and reading this, I definitely think that not only does the story hold up, and I think a lot of that has to do with because of these timeless characters, these timeless tales that are being told, but I think that it's incredibly smart. It is still incredibly original using these types of characters, and seriously just so enjoyable. And I feel like out of all of the Vertigo titles that I personally remember reading, for some reason this one ended up being usually on like the bottom of the list that I would recommend to people. Normally I find myself recommending things like Sandman because it's my favorite, also Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, as well as Watchmen, and even Y the Last Man. So there's so many of those Vertigo titles that I recommend to people, and I feel like I don't recommend this one enough.
Do you think you'll change now?
Yeah, now that I've gone back and reread it, I for sure think so. I When I actually read these copies, funny story, when I actually read these copies originally when I was in high school, I borrowed them from my high school photography teacher, who had a whole bunch of books like this behind him. And I picked these books up at a used bookstore, and I didn't realize because I hadn't opened it really until now, but apparently this copy of the of Animal Farm that I have is signed to someone named Michael. So Michael must have gotten this signed by Bill Willingham. So Michael, if you're watching, if you'd like your book back, let me know. I'll send this one back to you, and I'll buy a fresh new copy so you can get your sign. Because I opened it and I'm like, to Michael, what? So Michael, here you go.
Look at that.
Oh, do you know? That's why when you get yourself signed, just get them, the author or illustrator, to just sign their name, not
Yeah.
to you individually. Like,
Yeah.
I bet you know, like if he's listening right now or watching right now, he's like, "Mum, like,
You got rid of my books."
Yeah.
I found them. You said you didn't get rid of them."
Hey, you never underestimate the power of the internet. We might just find Michael.
You know,
We'll keep an eye out.
That's what happened to my parents' comics. My mum and my dad both collected Superman, Lois Lane, Batman, all from like the 50s, 60s, whatever. And both their mums threw them out. Like, honestly,
Aww.
I could be living in an 18-bedroom house now if they hadn't done that. Anyway, what about you, Jasmine? Do you think it holds up after 20 years?
Oh yeah, definitely. And especially the Animal Farm part. I mean, that could have been written yesterday. Like it is so prevalent right now. I think the first volume where we're just sort of getting introduced to the human fables, that one is timeless. Like Jennifer said, the characters are timeless, but detective stories in themselves are timeless. So that one would be good anywhere. But I think it's funny to me though. I think how prevalent the Animal Farm part in volume 2 is still like, yep, definitely that totally works in 2021.
I felt, to be honest with you, like I didn't really. There's only one thing that really got me was Reynard the fox and his use of language towards Snow White. I was like, I'm not sure if that's overly appropriate now, but other than that, although there are male idiots out there that do speak like that, but I just don't know anyone like that in the real world, and I couldn't imagine being comfortable sitting there with a man just telling a woman you're a hot babe and thinking that's okay for someone who has very little relationship with them.
Listen, man, he's a sly fox and he was shooting his shot. Okay, so I can see how that would apply.
I suppose though, in some ways, like there are sly foxes out there in 2021. I forgot the year for a second. Like that probably will try that stuff. So maybe it does hold up, but I just don't know anyone like that in the real world to appreciate hearing that. So maybe I need to get out more and meet some real life sly foxes for knowledge building, not not for anything else. I'm sure my wife wouldn't like me to hang around with real sly foxes. So anyway, I was going to say, I think in terms of the writing and the structure, why I sort of thought it was a good idea to cover the first 2 volumes is because I actually liked the introduction of the human fables versus the introduction of the animal fables. And I like how each volume has a main story, but actually I thought that Bill Willingham used the main story as a way of introducing a select bunch of characters in each one. Like, so there'll be like main characters within each volume, but also he used it as a chance to kind of give a whistle stop tour to show us how many people from the homelands came across. And even the people that he did show us, there's still vastly more, like as the story goes, as you'll discover. I just wanted to gauge both your opinions on what you thought, how that introduction worked in like a modern setting. So for me, I loved the set of New York. I love New York City. I've been there a couple of times, going back next year, looking forward to that. And I just think New York was a great place because, again, New York is probably one of the most famous cities in the world. You know, we know, you know, like London, Sydney, you know, these are cities that we see a lot on TV. I thought that he also used the setting really well. Like, so it's characters that we're familiar with, but also he went with a really familiar setting. So I quite liked that as well. I thought, to be honest, he did really well with the introduction, in my opinion. But what do you guys think, Jennifer?
Yeah, especially using and that like juxtaposition of New York is this big city, and even though it's this big city, there's a lot going on. It's known. I've never been to New York City, but you know, just being familiar with it and knowing it's the city that never sleeps. But then thinking about having this hidden underground old fables story, like they're still living there somewhere, so it really felt magical in that like big modern city. If I do remember correctly, like I said, it's been over 15 years since I've read the following volumes, but from what I remember, they do end up going back into the old kingdom. Is that correct?
They do,
So they do end up going back, and I know that there's kind of like a I won't get into it, but they do go back. So I do think that setting them up not in that world was a really good idea. So then once we do get into that, it feels even more magical. I mean, there's a reason why they're bringing you to there. But I do like that it shows us in New York City and then Animal Farm. So they're not actually in the land or the kingdom where they're originally from. And we'll eventually get there.
Yeah, I think later on so the first two volumes, I think, are great introduction volumes. And then as we go on, actually, it's probably talk about the mythology a bit here, but as we go on, the mythology builds, and not every story is kind of New York or the farm base. Some of it's flashbacks, some of it's just single story, like single character stories, like Boy Blue, for instance, and Flycatcher as well. Like they although they're very minor in volume 1 and 2, you see actually much bigger stories for them later on. So that's what I was saying about how he kind of is so little seeds now, but they get much bigger stories later on. And so there's kind of, you know, we get to see tiny bits of the mythology in the first 2 volumes, but I think the first 2 volumes work really well as like a good introduction to the world that we're in. So yeah, Jasmine, what do you think about sort of the introduction as well, using the current setting?
I loved it. I loved it. They didn't have to waste any time with it. It was kind of like you walk in and it's like, oh, Snow White's the administrator and Big B Wolf is the sheriff and Little Boy Blue is like the assistant. Like, all right, got it. I know who these people are. I recognize these names. I'm ready to run with it. But I did like how they introduced the familiar characters and they bring their drama with them, like your first introduction to Beauty and the Beast. Like, that introduction was hilarious to me. That one and Pinocchio, those are probably just the 2 best intros that we got in the first volume.
Do you know when you talk about funny things? Like, I started laughing out loud when Snow White got to the farm. And I can't remember the character, but the chicken like starts flying off, going, it's the feds. Like, and I actually burst out laughing. I was like, I just never in my life thought I'd ever read a chicken going on about the feds are here. Like,
it was Chicken Little, like Chicken Little. Yeah, like Chicken Little panics about everything.
And I was just like, I actually burst out laughing. I was like, oh, chicken going on about the feds. I was like, never in my life that I ever thought I'd read that. That was good. That was good to me. So, I touched on this a minute ago about the mythology. So I think the Bill did a really good job in this first 2 volumes of just concentrating on characters and small stories. But I just wondered if, so I know Jennifer's obviously gone ahead a little bit like me. So actually it's kind of curious more for Jasmine here. Like, did you get curious by any of the mythology? Like, cause obviously they do tease about the homeland and the adversary. And they kind of they kind of like give you little teasers and Easter eggs. But what, Jasmine, what are your thoughts on the mythology that we see?
I thought it was interesting the way that they kind of introduced the adversary and the homelands and the big battle. I thought it got really, really interesting when they're going through the speech at Remembrance Day. And it gets really kind of heavy for a minute because, and I actually wrote this down, but it said it took an invasion to unite us. Like they were originally so many different realms within this big kingdom, but like not everybody knew everybody else. And so as the mayor, old King Cole, as he goes through the sacred speech or sacred text or whatever it was that the beast called it, it kind of gets to one line that really jumped out at me. And it was like, but we didn't help. Like we could see what was happening in the other kingdoms, but we didn't help. And the line is, by the time we realized that he being the adversary, he wasn't merely interested in conquering that land or those people, that he was coming after all of us. It was too late and he had grown too powerful. And I thought that theme is so prevalent. And that's another reason why I feel like this story fits even like in modern times, like right now, 2021, because that is the age old story, right? And you get more reference to that in the second volume when Goldilocks is like, none of us are free until all of us are free. And so I just thought it was really nice that, yeah, we're getting a story about fairy tale characters, but at the same time, there is some substance here. Like you have this big issue, and the only way to fight this issue is for everybody to come together. But by the time everybody came together, it was too late. And now this is what you have left. So it's kind of like working within, you go to war with the soldiers you have, right? Like you have to be able to keep your society going. But if you had reacted sooner, if you had jumped in sooner, if you had done, taken the steps to kind of realize that we're all in this together, which is probably like the overall theme of this whole thing. It's, we're all the same, right? It doesn't matter if you're in animal form or in human form, we're all the same. So I thought that they laid the groundwork of that message really well by giving you some of the backstory, because for a few panels at the very least, you do get to see some of like the adversaries' minions, and they kind of all look like demons or, like centaurs. They look like half animal, half beast kind of creatures that are ravaging the kingdom lands. So it's interesting. And it definitely made me want to know who the adversary is, why he decided to take over, and why he didn't come to Earth.
I'll tell you what, you won't see who the adversary is at all. Like you won't see it coming. I thought it was great when they reveal it. So, yes. What do you think about the mythology, Jennifer?
One of the highest, like if I had to say someone who takes like classic mythology or anything like that and puts either like a modern spin on it, or the person that I think of the most is going to be Neil Gaiman. And Neil Gaiman is probably hands down my favorite comic book author. And rereading this, I got so many flashbacks to reading Sandman, which I was reading around the same time. And just the way that those classic characters get reimagined. And of course, in Sandman, it's these characters that are, you've got dream and you've got death and you've got destruction and desire and delirium. Like you've got the endless there in Sandman, which are maybe more obscure or maybe just ideas, where these are a little bit more characters that like we have very particular stories that are being told. So whenever I think of like the mythology and like those worlds being built from worlds that have already been built, I think of Neil Gaiman and I think of Sandman specifically. So seeing this and seeing those characters that are a little bit less mythological but being turned into a world and with this particular mythology, it was really I really enjoyed it, and it does make me want to go back and read more into it, like go read the third, fourth again, and then try to find all the other ones. Maybe I'll try to hit up Michael and
ask
like,
Michael, see what he got.
You got the third and fourth volume, man. I'll trade you. So, yeah.
It'd be hilarious if Michael actually
Yeah.
sees or watches this or whatever. Like, it'd be
Let's
like,
find
yeah,
Michael.
look, have the rest. I've got 7 to 8 now. My mum got rid of the first 6 years ago,
Yeah.
so you can have the rest. Um, just before we jump on to talk about the art, obviously, which is massively important, I'd just love to pick your brains on the murderer of Rose Red. Like, did you guys have any suspects? Because obviously everybody loves a good murder mystery. Did you like? Obviously, it doesn't go the way we thought it was going to go, which was a good twist. But did you suspect that anybody had potentially killed her before we got the reveal we did? On you go.
Uh-oh, I think
Oh,
you're
Jennifer, your
muted.
sound's gone. Yeah, I think you're muted.
Am I still muted?
Oh,
yeah,
no, there you go.
Okay. I had a truck going by, so I tried to mute it quickly. But
That's
the
okay.
person that I honestly thought was being set up for the murder was 100%, and this is me, like, I have already read this, but I had forgotten on the reread. So that was kind of nice to be like still surprised again, but I thought it was going to be Prince Charming. I knew, I knew it wasn't how it was going to be shaped up to be, but I thought it was going to be Prince Charming for sure.
I never thought she was dead. Like my whole theory, as with everything, if there's no body, like, are they really dead? So because there was no body in that apartment, I was like, she's not dead. But I think that they kind of cover the same storyline in the video game. But I couldn't remember the end of the video game, whether or not the girl actually died or not. So I knew she wasn't dead, but I really had no idea like who done it. When I think it probably tripped me up when they introduced Bluebeard. I was like, oh yeah, it's totally him. Like,
yeah.
I don't know who done it. No, I couldn't. I did remember. Unfortunately, I did remember the twist. But when I first read it, I'll be honest with you, I was thrown off by a lot of there was a lot of misdirection, which was very clever. So I couldn't utterly put my finger on it. So I was leaning more heavily towards Bluebeard, but then I was like, but is that just too obvious? So I struggled to pick a killer, but I didn't suspect in the first time. I do remember the first time I read it, I didn't suspect that she was necessarily alive in the way that got shown, like, i.e. she was involved in faking her death. I knew there was a bigger mystery, and I remember in the first issue seeing the padlock on the fridge and seeing him Bigby notice it, and that was the thing that made me think, okay, there's some sort of twist, but I just can't think that I just didn't at any point think, okay, this is that she's faked her death or anything clever like that. So, I was gonna say let's jump onto I think sort of talking about the artwork itself, and the first thing for me is just the covers of the issues. Now I don't know if you guys, I know you guys read it digitally, and sorry, Jasmine, you read it digitally, and you read the collected editions, Jennifer. Does it in the collected edition show the covers as well?
It does. So each one, this one's, I believe, issue 2. So it does show them here, which I really appreciate. Yeah.
I absolutely love these sort of painted covers. This is like I sort of showed this earlier, the first issue. This here it is. This is the second issue, like you said, Jennifer. That's the second cover.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to go through each one, but look, this third issue I think is brilliant. Like, these covers are just so glorious. Like, honestly, I love these covers. They're so fantastic, and they're very much of the kind of indie world that you would expect. Like, for me, did you see the covers? You've also seen the covers digitally as well, I would have thought.
Yeah, they're in there. But I really kind of like the one behind me. I like this kind of style of the covers where it's more.
Oh, that's the cover of the first.
Of the collected issue. Yeah. But I do think that the individual covers are very like painting like, and they probably ring more true toward like the Brothers Grimm versions of these characters than the versions that we get here. So I think that that's probably a really nice homage, but I like these kinds of covers where it's like all of these characters, and then it's like, what the hell are they doing on a subway train?
Well, I guess because they're in the normal Monday world, isn't it?
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
And then the interiors. So the interiors for me, I don't think. It's not Jeff Lemire, but it's I don't guess far off it. Like, it's kind of just ordinary to me, but equally it's really fits the kind of the story that's been told by Bill Willingham, and I don't think it's like unnecessary to. I think it would be unnecessary to have, I don't know, I guess Chris Bachalo type style art. I think this is very kind of just showing, and the art is ordinary, but it's equally detailed, and I really enjoy reading it. But I don't think it's not over the top, so that's why I think it suits it really well for me. That's kind of, and I didn't find the artwork distracted from the story either. Like, although I liked looking at it, like, and I didn't think it was ugly. It wasn't amazing to me, but equally it didn't take away from the story.
Yeah, I actually preferred all the animals to the humans. So especially when we get to volume 2, to see the variety of animals that they have in volume 2, that was really fun to look at, versus in the first one, it's, they're mostly people and then Colin occasionally. But I did find that the first volume was extraordinarily wordy. Like there were definitely some parts where it felt like you barely get to see any illustration because the thought bubbles or the word bubbles are taking up so much space on the page. And I understand that it's a lot of information that you have to get out. It didn't feel like a slog to read all of it, but it did feel like at some point the words did start to take away from the actual illustrations.
I wanted to show you, like, obviously this is on the video, this double page here of issue 6 when they get to the farm. That's probably my favorite double sort of splash page, just showing because obviously in the first volume it's mainly set in New York, and yes, okay, we got to see some castles hidden away in like small rooms and stuff like that. But I love the fact that actually this really played into the fantasy world that we're getting into, like with castles and
the shoe,
the shoe. Yeah, honestly. So I enjoyed the art. What do you think, Jennifer, of the artwork?
Yeah, I agree. Especially if you compare what the cover looks like to the interior art, there is a pretty big difference. Yeah. I did like that there's a couple of pages that do some really incredible detail work. So like if there's flashbacks that are done, or if they're telling a story, they're using like frames that have a really cool looking, I don't know what you would call, or there's just an ornateness to it. I guess here's another splash page here too, but just some of that gets shown along the edges. And it particularly happens whenever in the first volume, whenever the clues are being hinted at, some of that is used to frame the panels, which I really appreciated, but that didn't take away from the artwork. But I agree, Jasmine, there's a lot of panels in here where it's just so dialogue heavy that it pushes some of the other stuff. And do I think that there could have been some things that were cut out, or could that have just, if there was stronger editorialship? I don't know if that's the word that I'm looking for here. I'm checking and seeing who the editor is, if it's not Karen Berger, I can't see here, but I do think that some of the words and the dialogue could have been taken away, and the story still would have been incredibly packed.
Yeah, because I think that Bigby is really wordy, sort of throughout the first volume, especially before, right, like issue 5 leading up to him, or issue 4 leading up to him before the big reveal. I think I understand you're trying to show some personality, and I appreciate getting to see more of his personality, but at the same time, it's like, but it was about a 10-page run all right there together, where it was just like every time you flip the page, it was just so many bubbles, and it's like, oh, but it's a comic. Like, you kind of want to see more of you telling me the story through the images as well.
Yep. Show me the story. Don't necessarily tell me the story.
Right.
Yeah.
Jennifer, it's the editor. I don't know her, but Shelley Bond is the editor.
Oh, Shelley Bond. Okay. Yeah. I actually really appreciate Shelley Bond's work. They do a lot of really cool anthologies. Yeah.
I guess so. This is where it's creator owned, isn't it? So it's obviously, even if an editor wants to probably necessarily make changes, whether it being creator owned, they probably would have an overall say. I would imagine that the editor and them work closely together. but where it's creator owned, the creator probably could say, well, no, this stays, like, so
Yeah.
it's not a Marvel superhero Spider-Man book where editors are like, no. Like,
Yeah. They dictate the story as opposed to the story,
creator.
like, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's all like, I mean, obviously we don't know how those conversations went 20 years ago. They probably couldn't even remember if we asked them now. So,
Yeah.
but no, I did enjoy the artwork, and I did think but those borders that you talk about, they use that a lot throughout the run of comics where they sort of highlight pages and stuff like that. And there's certain pages I think where you can even see like detailed of like mice and things like that from what I can remember in those borders, which I think is pretty cool. So I think we'll put a stop to the review, but I think overall I love these first 10 issues, the first 2 volumes, and I want to try and make myself carry on going.
You could do a little at a time.
Yeah, I know. I've got to find that time,
Yeah.
even if it's just an issue a day or something like that, But I think I've got to try and make myself carry on going. And so Jennifer, I think you said the same thing. You're carry on going as well. Is there anything you want to add before we finish up?
The thing that I think that I'm going to take away from this read is that I might try to suggest this to people more often than I do. I think that when it comes to some of those other Vertigo classics, I have a lot of Vertigo classics that I suggest, and this one hasn't been on that list as often as I think it should be. So going to try to do that more.
Brilliant. What about you, Jasmine?
I'm going to try to keep going. So I picked these up digitally. They were available as part of Comixology Unlimited, the first couple of volumes. But like some of the other volumes are like $5 for, volume 4, or $5 for volume 5. So I might go ahead and spend a few bucks here and there to keep going. Because now you got me really interested in who the adversary is. Like, bet it's Prince Charming.
It's not just like who the adversary is. It's like why does he become the adversary?
Okay. All right.
I mean, you might be able to see if Michael's got some more copies laying around.
Yeah, I'm gonna hit up Michael. That's what I'm gonna do.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, Jennifer, for joining us. I was gonna say before we wrap up, is anything coming up? So this episode, obviously, we're recording and will drop later in the week. Is there anything coming up at all throughout November that you want to highlight to people?
So like I said earlier, on my channel every Sunday, my co-host and I, Mars, go live, and we talk about all the books that we've been reading that week, some stuff that we've picked up. I also do another graphic novel book club where we do read a lot of things like this. We just read Witches by Snyder and Jock, so we just read that. I think that we're going to be doing a saga reread coming up soon. And so I do that over on Comic Chop News. That's the YouTube channel.
Awesome.
Dan and I at Comic Chop News, we've also been doing a Dune book club. I'm a huge fan of Dune, and so we read the first book, couple chapters at a time. We just finished the second book in time for the movie. We've reviewed the movie, and now we're about to hit the third book, Children of Dune. So we'll do that also on Comic Chop News.
Oh, awesome.
Sorry, Karen. I just do another show on Fridays called Comic Talk Live with a couple friends, usually over on Wildebeest Fitness Channel. Yeah.
Awesome. I was gonna say I didn't know you did the book club on Comic Shop News, so I'm gonna check that out. I'm interested to know more about Dune. I'm debating how far to go with it. So
so I could literally talk your ears off for hours about Dune. I've seen it probably 15 to 20 times, if not more, between the theater and HBO Max. I love this new movie. Dune is a personal favorite of mine, so really excited to deep dive into that.
Did you watch all the originals and the TV series and all that as well?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I've got a couple Dune tattoos as well.
Oh, mate, you are a huge Dune fan.
Very huge Dune fan, for sure.
So, and where can people find you online?
Yeah, it's a little bit confusing, but on YouTube, it is Comics Will Break Your Heart. On Instagram, it's Comic Books Will Break Your Heart. On Twitter, I used to go by Gin and Comic Show, so like gin and tonic, but gin and comic. But I don't use that anymore. It kind of like rebranded. So you can still find me at Gin and Comic Show on Twitter. And Michael, seriously, if this is your book, hit me up. Like Michael, very specifically, come find me, man.
And well, yeah, just thank you really like for joining us. This
definitely.
awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
One other quick question we always ask is like, what's your comic origin story? How did you get into like comics and pop culture in general?
Yeah, it started when I was in high school, and actually, it was late middle school. I had read Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman, and there was another book that I had read. Then went into American Gods. So I was just reading a lot of that, a lot of fantasy at the time, and then found out that he wrote comic books, read Stardust, and then got into the Sandman, and I think that was really it from there. Most of my origin was picking up trades or borrowing trades from friends. So a lot of the early stuff that I read was stuff like Fables, Sandman, Watchmen. A lot of those Vertigo titles were the ones that I got into more, but now I just read 20 to 30 single issues a week, and I try to read at least 3 to 4 trades a week. So it's a lot of heavy reading. I also right now work from home, so I think that gives back time into my day where I can do those types of things. So.
That's awesome.
Amazing. Yeah, no, it's amazing. Like 30 a week. There was a point a long time ago where I was the same, but I couldn't do it now. So I probably read about 20 to 30 a month now, like not anything like that. But anyway, Jasmine, what are we doing next month?
All right. So for our next book club, we are returning to the world of Scott Pilgrim. We're going to be tackling volume 2 in our next book club.
Yeah, and we will also bring our guest host that we had for the last one. So Robbie will be returning from Pop Culture Philosophers for that. So,
rounding out 2021.
Yeah, we thought it'd be a nice way to end the year. So
yeah.
Anyway, you can follow us online. We're Geeks Unleashed everywhere: Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And yeah, that's it.
And you can get this podcast wherever you get your podcasts: Google, Podbean, Apple, Spotify. We are everywhere. So please give us a 5-star review and tell your geeky friends.
Thank you for watching and listening. Have a good day.
Good journey.
Oh, good journey. Keep doing that.